What's up? What's up? What's up, people? Welcome back to another episode of Dropping Bars. I am your host, Kimron Corion, and I have an amazing show for you today. Today, I have two gentlemen that I respect to the core. I have Mr. Perry Douglas, who many of you may remember from a previous episode of Dropping Bars, where he gave we spoke about, digital transformation. We spoke about wealth in the Caribbean, and he had some very strong ideas surrounding wealth creation and tourism and agriculture. I know many people reached out to me afterwards saying, "Hey, I want to, I give me, can you connect me with this guy?" So we have Mr. Perry Douglas, and we also have Mr. Claude Douglas, Mr. Claude Geoffrey Douglas, with us today on the show. And I mean, I don't think there is anybody, especially Grenadian, who doesn't know the name Claude Douglas. I mean, I think everybody knows this gentleman, famous in the Grenadian community. And today we are talking about applied intelligence. Applied intelligence. Mr. Perry Douglas Perry recently wrote a book called Applied Intelligence: A New Thinking for Caribbean Prosperity in the 21st Century. And so today we are talking applied intelligence, and before we jump right in, let me ask each of them to just introduce themselves briefly. So I'll start with Perry. Can you just give a brief introduction into yourself and who you are and what you do?
Yep. Perry Douglas. I'm a Grenadian. And I don't know if you mentioned it, but Joe, Claude, and I are cousins, first cousins. So just letting everybody know that. Who am I? I'm essentially an author and an entrepreneur. And, I'm just looking to contribute the best as I can to the prosperity of Grenada and the Caribbean based on, my new thinking approaches, that type of thing. So nothing fancy. Perry Douglas, entrepreneur and author. That's about it.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Claude Douglas, can you, for the one person that doesn't know who Claude Douglas is, can you
actually lecturer, and also author, social commentator, political analyst, and the list goes on. And I'm happy to be on Dropping Bars for the very first time.
So thank you very much, Mr. Claude Douglas, for that. So let's just jump right in, and I will ask Mr. Perry Douglas. Can you tell me talk about your book? Why did you think it was important to write such a book touching on applied intelligence and well, before you even tell me why you wrote the book, tell me what is applied intelligence, and then tell me why you think it was important to for such a book in the 21st century.
Yeah, so applied intelligence is essentially a way of thinking. One of the things I'll say up front, I'm not here, or the book is not about trying to tell anybody what to believe, all right? To change their belief systems or whatnot. What the book is essentially about is a way of thinking, an understanding of thinking from a cognitive, scientific perspective, right? So what we want to try to achieve with applied intelligence is how do we apply our intelligence to the problems that we have in order to solve it, as best as we can, which for in regards to our greater prosperity. So really, at the end of the day, applied intelligence is strategic thinking, how to develop strategic thinking. And also one of the things that has come out of it is sort of this, what I call the sophistication of self-preservation. What I mean by that is how to succeed in the universe, how to succeed in nature. And one of the reasons why I also wrote the book is at this point in time when we are seeing, digital transformation and we're seeing the rest of the world moving forward, the Caribbean is at tremendous risk if we do not keep up with technology and if we do not keep up with the rest of the world. So what I'm trying to say is, look, here's a way of understanding the universe, understanding nature, and how we can make our way in it, how we can create a civilization in it. And I really think, Grenada has the opportunity, and even the wider Caribbean too. But being a Grenadian, of course, let's try to see if we can lead the way in becoming another Singapore. And people think about the amazing success of Singapore, but how did that happen? It's really because they applied their intelligence and they created the strategy, and they built a strategy with no resources, absolutely nothing. Grenada, technically, is in a better, position from a zero-based economy potential, from agriculture, ag tech potential, but we have to have a strategy moving forward. So applied intelligence, in fact, is an agnostic, it's agnostic, and it could be applied to anything. So my first book, there'll be more, but applied intelligence essentially is how do we apply our intelligence to get the outcomes economically and for sustained prosperity in the universe. So that's a long elevator speech, but that's what it is.
Okay, and so let me then ask Mr. Claude Douglas now, as a lecturer in Grenada, and someone who has been educating our young people for years upon years. How do you see this type of thinking, this sort of renaissance in new thinking, really helping to push our country forward if we were to take that kind of thinking approach with our young people? Based on your interaction with young people, youths, and just as a lecturer over the years.
Well, let me just congratulate Perry. I actually read, the introduction, and I was very impressed. I got more. I got more. And no flattery is intended here, but really and truly, the depth, of it, and also the simplicity in terms of reading and all of those things. And I believe that it is very relevant at this time. I always contend that we are light years behind, in terms of our thinking. All right. We have a lot of resources at our hand in Grenada and other parts of the Caribbean as well. But what do we do with it? There's a lack of creativity. Yes, the intelligence is there, but it is not applied. How can we make more of what we actually have? And I think that book really is addressing that. How can we deal with our solutions? All right. Our problems, finding solutions for problem. The book basically can answer those questions. And I think in the field of academia, once it is used, not only as a reference text, but that basically can lead as a forerunner for a particular course at any college or university or what have you. Because I think it's a great subject, a great subject. Yes, we say a lot of intelligent people, but look at where we are at in terms of our development. You understand? It means that there is something that is not connected. All right? Something that is not connected with all of those theoretical information that we have. What do we do with them? You understand? What do we do with them? Are we actually just sitting in them, or just placating them? We need basically, as the book basically suggested and posited, and as Perry said, it's not really to change people's thinking or what have you, but actually to present a position in which leaders, in particular Caribbean leaders, can actually embrace, can apply, because we're talking applied intelligence here, to make the development more facilitated, because we went, in all honesty, when we look at our Caribbean region, we are not far better than we were, in the post-slavery period, in the immediate post-slavery period, right? And I want to believe the reason for that is because we are not using, the intelligence that we have. And I'm not saying that we are not an intelligent people. We are an intelligent people. But in terms of the application, like when I teach sociology, I tell my students all the time, I say, if you cannot apply the information, then it's a waste of time. You understand me? It's a waste of time. What we need to do is an application of the knowledge and the information that we have. We boast about our universities, the UE and the UG and the UTT and what have you. You understand me? But in terms of creating, you understand me? Creating what I call resource-based, you understand me? Information, among other things, to drive our economies forward. There is a lack, a woeful lack of that. So I think the book basically will address that particular issue, provided that our political leaders, you understand, they develop that appetite, to actually consume, and apply what basically the book is actually getting at.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And I noticed that part of what you speak about in the book, you speak about power, and the world pretty much being about power, and there are, I guess, institutions of power within our society, but those are made up by people. All right, so I'm trying to look at that relationship that exists between people, institution, and power. So Perry, can you talk to me a little bit about that part, the power side of things, the power dynamic?
First, I want to say, boy, the other Mr. Douglas gave. I wonder if he wrote my book, because I have to think now. But no, I think, as you can see, why Claude is having such esteem with such deep knowledge, and he has deep knowledge with the core problems of Grenada and the Caribbean. So, one thing I wanted to just say before I go into your thing in a second, but he made a very good point. If you can't apply something, then it's of no value. The Caribbean has become over academicized. I mean, so if you can't put any application to something, if you can't apply it, then it's a waste of time. That's why I use a lot of mathematics in here, because you have to apply something. Because other than that, we're just talking about philosophy. But in regards to your question on power, the world comes down to power. And what we have to understand as a people, right, is that at the end of the day, if you have no power, right, you really don't have anything. So what you have to do to get the position of power is you have to create economic value. Because one of the things I talk about in the book is the flow of power. Power, we tend to move in a top-down way, where we're advised by UN and consultants and all. That's top-down. I'm a data guy. So if you go back post-World War with this development discourse, all right, top-down economics development has never worked. Things historically, if you look over the last 2,000, 3,000 years, has developed from the bottom up. So the relationship between people and institutions, right, comes down to those are the ecosystems of power. So if we one of the things I talk about also in the book is that value is a transactional thing. If you don't have value, you can't transact in the universe. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the way the world is right now, if you look at what happened through COVID, right, where Caribbean islands or even Africa, you kind of left on your own to get the vaccine. The sophistication of self-preservation tells you that people are going to take care of themselves first. Not necessarily about racism. It's tribes. You can go back hunter-gatherer days, right? Things become tribal in the universe. So unless we can create some form of economic value, create that economic value, and use that economic value to transact in the universe, it's going to be very difficult. Because I just asked the question, what about development that has worked from a top-down perspective, the UN and all those type of things? That does not work. History shows that does not work. What works is bottom-up entrepreneurship, and it has to be internal. You can only grow from an internal perspective, where you can create an agriculture economy, for example, based on technology, and create an export-driven economy based on your agriculture. So that is value, value added, all of these things. So the whole thing about power comes down from by understanding how power flows. It flows from economics. Then economics turns into political power, and then that turns into privilege. And then you can wield that power in the universe for whatever you want. So what I tried to do and explain in the book is how nature, how even how organisms exist in nature. First, you have to learn to survive. And once you learn to survive in nature, then you can thrive, right? So I have one of my first, I think my first chapter is the nature of economics, and I use ecology and ecosystems to show that's how economics is, and we have to understand that, and that's really how we achieve power.
Okay, thanks for that. That was very comprehensive. So thanks for sharing that. And so I'm gonna come back to you, Claude. And as it relates to Perry just spoke about, the dynamics of power, and it being a sort of a bottom up type of relationship in terms of and we have to create that economic power, and that economic power can translate into that political power, and so based on your experience, I know for example one of the books that you wrote is you wrote a book about it was win to govern, govern to win, with that was I always utilize that phrase. Like when I speak to people, I always say I said to people, one of my mentors, Claude Douglas, he had this phrase, you need to win to govern. I'm talking about politics now, and then govern to win.
Yeah.
How have you seen that dynamic playing out in the Grenadian context? That sort of that kind of bottom up type of approach that Perry talks about. How have you seen that dynamic play out in the Grenadian context?
Well, what we normally do, and we have been doing that for a very long time, right? We have been taking prescriptions, from these international organizations, who actually have not done any thorough, analysis of our situation. Because you see, what will be able to work in Jamaica or Barbados may not be able to work in Grenada, because even though, yes, we are all Caribbean countries, our social and economic realities are different, So sometimes these organizations, what they do with the top-down approach to development is that they have a one-size-fits-all, So they feel, well, it's a region, and all countries in the region are alike. They are small island developing states and what have you. So they have one prescription. And we know that in the medical field. So even if we may have the same complaint, the pharmacist will ask you if you have any underlying conditions. The same drug might be good, for the same disease that we have, sorry. But my underlying condition may not be the best. You understand it? All right? I may have complications if I take it. Perry may not have it because he does not have any underlying conditions. So I draw this analogy basically to say that a lot of the times that when we try to implement strategies that are actually prescribed by other organizations, international lending organizations and so forth, they actually don't work. And Jamaica was a case in point, in the 1980s and so forth. As a matter of fact, Jamaica's economy was actually destabilized by the IMF. All right, so we have to be so careful that the people on the ground are the people with the knowledge, but we don't go to them. All right, CARICOM is still struggling. All right, since 1973, and the reason why CARICOM is still struggling is because CARICOM has never taken a bottom-up approach. You understand me? And you cannot unite people. People have to unite themselves. Right? You can't. I don't care what treaty. You understand it? You put together, whether the Treaty of Trafalgar or the Treaty of St. George's, regardless of what treaty you put together, you cannot unite people. People must, you understand me, be driven by, have this self-motivation, to unite themselves and what have you. And I'm saying all of this to say that in the context of applied intelligence and development, I believe that if we take this practical approach, we make things complex. Things that are very simple, sometimes we make them very complex. If we take this bottom-up approach, as Mr. Douglas says, suggested, in his book and what have you, and have more what I call more practicality being applied in our finding solutions to our problem, I believe the Caribbean will take a leap forward in terms of development and what have you. But we have not been able, to engage in this applied intelligence that has been posited by the author. Take, for example, research, right? We still put, for example, I can reference Grenada because that's where I live. We are still exporting our raw material, our export commodities, practically the same way. We have been doing that for what? Close to a century. We have been doing the same thing. But the industries, and the relevant organizations that are involved in the cocoa and the nutmeg have not, reached the level at which they can engage in serious research. What is it can we do for ourselves? A lot of research was done in the past, but again, they are lying on the shelves because there is a lack of political will, among other things, to drive this thing forward. All right? And if some foreign-based, what we call MNCs, they call them, multinational corporation, does not come forward and say, okay, let me try to do something for you guys. We are just lame with it because, there is a lack of will. And the lack of will has to do with the fact that we are not applying the intelligence that we have to drive these things forward. And I think that has been hindering our development for the past few years.
Okay, so thank you for breaking that down, and I think I could agree with you in terms of what you were saying, but as you were talking and as Perry was talking, I remember one of the chapters in the book is called "Do Not Blame China," and I thought that was a very interesting. That was a very interesting. I want to say title for the chapter. So I want to ask Perry, what talk to me about that, because we've seen situations in the past where people are saying that China is swooping us with its coming in and its debt trap and lending us a bunch of money that we cannot pay back, and before you know it, they're taking over all our national assets and so on and so forth. And there is this whole thing that is that we find people are saying. What is your thought process surrounding the whole do not blame China what in the context of what we're talking about here now?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So one of the things, I mean, it might be obvious, but all of my work in this book is based on research and data. Nothing I'm saying here is necessarily me putting out an opinion there. The book is in four parts. The final part is really where I start maybe giving my opinion, but everything is based on data. So my findings, right, are based on data. So when you do the analysis, this is what the analysis tells you, right? So I just wanted to, point that out. So in regards to China, right, one of the things that is also a cornerstone of my book is history, because history is data. And if you do not analyze your history, and history often tells you what the present will look like or what the future will look like if you go back to history. So when I talk about China, China is essentially executing the same playbook the colonizers did before. I call it China. I don't think I've phrased this. I don't think I came up with this term, but I call it colonialism 2.0, right? So what happens in that section? I do a full data analysis. I look at the evidence and I give you evidence from Jamaica, Kenya, Tanzania. What's the other? Not Zaire, but African countries, and I give you data and analysis that shows what China has been doing. So fundamentally, okay, what China is doing is not brutality in terms of they coming in and they're using force. Back then for colonialism, they used the army, they used the institutions, from a slavery to transition from slavery over to colonialism, right? Now, what China is doing is using cash, is using capital. So I give the example of in Kenya where they loaned, they built a railroad in Kenya, and it was billions and billions of dollars. And COVID time came, and they couldn't meet the debt payment, right? So what happened in that situation when they couldn't meet the debt payment? Chinese said, "Okay, you can't meet the debt payment, then we'll take your port as collateral." Can you imagine just think about that for a second. We'll come and we'll take your port as collateral. Now remember, that was always the plan. China's benefit is not looking to get a return on investment in terms of capital. They're looking to get a return in regards to national assets where they can use those national assets and create wealth. So imagine if they took that port over, and that's a portway for internal from East Africa on in, right? Fortunately, the Kenyan Supreme Court came in and said, "No way, this is not happening. You're not getting any of our national assets," because what China is trying to do is take control. Look, I can't remember the country in Africa where China has put up their own police station. So what I want you to understand, okay, is that you can deal with China. You can get money from China, but you have to be able to properly negotiate what the heck is going on. If you're taking money from them and there's no way you can pay it back, okay, the playbook for China is if you have no way to pay it back, is simply we'll take a national assets. This is what happened in Jamaica, where they built this particular property. They didn't have enough money to pay back, and then China came and said, "Okay, we'll just take the entire property." And then what they did is that they built stores and they built a whole bunch of things and they're leasing it out. So there's no cost. There's no cost for land, no cost for nothing. And they brought in all Chinese workers, that type of thing. What I'm trying to say is that we need to apply our intelligence and understand, okay, the only way out for our prosperity has to come from internal. It has to come from our own internal strategies. It has to come from our own. We have to be able to export and grow globally. But we can't fall for the same colonialism 2.0 again, right? Back then, we had an excuse. They had force. There was slavery, transition for colonialism. 100%, you can understand it. But now, what happens when you have leaders, okay? When you have leaders who will sell out their own people for a few dollars, and that's what it is. Because from a corruption perspective, that's exactly what is happening, right? So who suffers in the end? The people suffer, okay? Because if you look at Grenada, for example, when you do the math and when you look at the statistics, Grenada is on its way to becoming like a Haiti. People will say, "Oh my God, no." Well, I'm not making an opinion based on how I feel. I'm basing it based on the math and based on the analysis and based on the trend lines of the increase in poverty in Grenada. And there's no growth, or there's no economy happening. So the whole thing about China is not to blame China. We have to be responsible for ourselves. We have to make politicians accountable to us, the people. That's why that's why we're in a democracy. And if we continue, there's no such thing as easy money. I mean, this is basic stuff. There's no such thing as easy money, right? So if they're going to give you all this money, where's that money going? What are you going to do with it? Is that money being invested in enterprises? Is that money being invested in local entrepreneurs in Grenada? No. I'm telling you right now that they're building that big in my home area, St. Patrick's, in Liver Beach. They're looking. I'm seeing that they're looking to build this whole thing. Now, I go into deep analysis on this. That is a geopolitical move by China, okay? Because what I see there, if you read the Chinese, if you look at the Chinese road, what's it called? Claude may know, but they have this grand plan. It's called the Road and Something Plan. So China's agenda is clear. It's geopolitical, right? So when they're talking about building a resort in Grenada, they're not building no resort. That will be a port. And what will happen, because in order to, China's looking for global conquest, and China's looking, for colonialism from a 2.0 perspective, as I said. So the risk to Grenada is this. If they build that big so-called resort there, and they build a big port based on what a yacht port, as they call it, based on the plans, China now starts moving in from a geopolitical perspective. Now you create a conflict with America, okay? These things bring war. And what will happen? Grenada will suffer, and Grenada will be caught in the crossfire. You have to think ahead of why people are doing things, and it goes back to power. And you cannot allow people to come into your own country and essentially take over. Now, again, we have to get foreign investment. We have to get capital in. But we have to come with a strategy, an investment plan, and make a deal based on intelligence, and make a deal that is in our benefit and also that will benefit investor. But that doesn't mean full control and take over. If the investments do not benefit entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, they don't benefit society. That means the people don't benefit. And how can we grow our economy if we can't create? Look, the growth of a middle-class economy is the basis, okay, of all growing, sustainable, civilized society. How are we going to build a middle-class society if we don't have entrepreneurship, if we don't create wealth, okay? So the whole thing about don't blame China is that we have to be responsible for ourselves. We can't be blaming everybody for our own community. We have brains. We are intelligent. All I'm saying is apply that intelligence, okay, to our benefit. And that is what I call the sophistication of self-preservation. We are responsible for ourselves. Nobody else is.
That's a very interesting perspective. And so now it's like, okay, I definitely need to get my copy of the book, because I really want to kind of delve deeper into exactly what you're talking about. So I really want to hear Claude's perspective or feedback on everything you just spoke about. What are your thoughts there?
I think Perry has made it lucidly clear. You understand me? I don't blame these countries and multinational corporations and what have you, because it seems as though, we are regressing, intellectually speaking, because you had a situation where the entire region was colonized, all right? And as a result of that, we had what we call underdevelopment taking place. While development was taking place in the colonized, the colonizers, countries, and Eric Williams made it, really, really plain in his book, Capitalism and Slavery, and we back to square one again. You understand me? We back. I thought basically by now, in 2023, we would have learned our lesson. But what is happening is a recolonization of the Caribbean right now. You understand me? Through entrepreneurship, So you are actually, you have this appetite, yes, for foreign investors, but not because they come in that you would allow them, you understand me, to do whatever they want, and that is what is happening. So we lay we drop our bags, we roll out a red carpet to them, I'm not saying that they should not be given incentives, because they need incentives and what have you. But we had done that in the past, with a lack of intelligence, and it did not work. 1948, to be specific, industrialization by invitation between Arthur Lewis and so forth, and it was not successful. Again, because what we normally do, we operate as though we lack basic common sense when it comes to those things. So investors come, whether it's China, whether it's MNC, whether they come in. And because they are in, you understand, the operation, the way they operate, bring benefit more to them, you understand me, and their country of origin than Grenada. Take, for example, Pre-COVID, we had an economic growth of about 5.5%, right? And this is based on facts produced by the Caribbean Development Bank, fastest growing economy in the Caribbean. Okay? But what happened? There has not been a corresponding decline in poverty. What's the reason for that? Because most of the profits basically have been what? Expatriated. These companies, they just keep operation money sufficient for the operation in the host country. Right? The same thing happened. So is that we are not learning. Right? In 1948, in the early 50s, invitation by industrialization and so forth. Industrialization by invitation, sorry. The same thing happened. Some of these investors, after they enjoyed the tax holidays and all of those things, when it was over, what they did, they moved to another country, to get the same thing again. But what I'm saying is, intelligence basically will allow us to put measures in place, to prevent those things from happening. You understand me? So Perry is right. We cannot blame these people. We have to blame ourselves. This is what we have allowed, you understand me, them to do. So not because, yes, we want some investment, we will just roll over, just roll over and just allow them to have the free will. And if you look at China, China is a very, very, I call an intelligent country. Yeah, that book will sell in China. That book will sell in China because when I'm looking at China started giving free trips to countries over the world. Come in China, come and see what we are doing. Now, the underlying thing there is cultural imperialism. You understand me? Because women start buying dresses in China, they start buying all sorts of things in China. Look in Grenville. Whoever thought we'd have a Chinese food in place, a restaurant in Grenville, right? And there are more to come, right? And China is doing this strategically because China is one of the largest contributors, financially speaking, to the Caribbean Development Bank. You understand me? So they are using intelligence to locate themselves within the region, and not only to locate themselves, but to do so beneficially at the expense of us because we are allowing them to do that. And I have no issues with China for doing so because everybody has to take care of themselves. As Terry mentioned in the book. And
Okay, thank you for that, for breaking that down. And I feel like I'm wondering if Claude got a copy of the book and I didn't get a copy of the book because.
But what the issues Terry are raising there are not new issues. You understand it? These are not new issues. These are all issues that we have been, dealing with, for years. It's just that, the whole approach and what he's posited basically is being echoed now by someone in a very forceful manner. You understand me? People talk about it and around it, but in terms of having this pointed, approach now to it, I think this is what the book actually is doing, but it's good.
Yeah. So, and I really do think that, based on the discussion that we're having here, and that once the book is out, and I know we're gonna talk about where people can get it, and so it's something that that really should be we should talk about it more heavily in the Caribbean and try to get our Caribbean people, leaders, and just our young people coming up to actually get a copy of that book. But I know we're running out of time, so before we wrap up, I just want to touch on 2 points before we wrap up. One of the things that you said, Perry, is knowledge. Knowledge is the new money, right? And I'm pretty sure that Claude will definitely agree with that, being an educator for so many years. Knowledge is the new money. Can you just touch on that, on the significance of that for me, just to kind of break it down a little bit?
Yes. So knowledge has always been the source of wealth creation. Knowledge from 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, building pyramids, the agricultural revolutions, the industrial revolutions. Everything is based on knowledge. Okay, so what happens is that how do you create a business? How do you create wealth? You have to have some form of knowledge and understanding to do that. So my thing in the book is we need to develop a strong ecosystem of knowledge. Knowledge is the key. And in this world today, in the digital world, it's no longer plants and equipment, no real estate, all that. The price of entry is much lower because we live in a digital economy. So really, the understanding of the digital world and the platforms that need to push us forward is critical. So one of the reasons I started writing this book, and then when it got delivered, boy, I said this thing looked like a textbook. Because what I've done in this book too is not only give a view, I give the analysis, but I give real solutions that actually can be done, right? But it all comes down to knowledge. And one of the most important things is we have to be educating our kids based on the new economy. And I think Claude could speak a little bit more about that. But the issue that we have, particular in the universities in the Caribbean, we are not teaching based on the real world. So the whole thing about applied intelligence, I've broken it down where it could actually be used as a course, because I have the 6 stages of applied intelligence, right? And there's 6 stages. And what we need to teach our young people is how to compete in the world. We live in a global world. Grenada is a small island, but look, we're on digital Zoom, whatever technology it is, and we are having a conversation. So to buy my book, you buy my book on Amazon. You don't got to leave your house. So therefore, we have to have a level of education in real time, data science, applied intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning. That has to be incorporated into our curriculum, because guess what? If we do not do that, the rest of the world is doing that, and the Caribbean, Grenada, will have a level of poverty and suffering that it never has seen before. And in the book, one of the most important things I address in the book is climate change. And I want to address this because we are all here. But my purpose is not about me now, is what do I leave behind? What is my legacy? It's not about me. It's about my children and my future generations. Grenada is where I come from. The fact of the matter is I give a full analysis, actually based on UN research, that by the year 2050, okay, there will be 400 million people from a migration perspective migrating due to climate change. The Caribbean, I don't know, overall, maybe 19 million people or whatnot. But what happens is that the Caribbean and the South Pacific, the Pacific Islands, are slated to be underwater anywhere 75 to 100 years from now. Okay, so I break down the case of Caribbean refugees, and what I'm showing you from that is that if you don't create wealth, if you don't create economic prosperity, if science is science, okay, science is science, and the fact is, if climate change at this particular pace, these small islands go underwater, people will have to immigrate, but you're going to need wealth to come into these countries, because you know that if you don't, they're not going to allow you in. When I went back to Grenada last with my kids, I was at Spice Beach Resort, and I was showing that the beach has moved, the water has moved all the way up, and the owner at the time mentioned to me, he's passed, but has mentioned to me that sometimes he can't sell those rooms because the water runs all the way up into those rooms. That's science. That means climate change is affecting. We have to think about those things. We have to think about how we're going to live. Georgetown, Guyana, for example, is one of the places, top 10 places to be slated to be underwater, okay, by the end of the decade. And they're doing engineering and a whole bunch of stuff. These are real threats to the very survival of the Caribbean species. This is a real threat to Grenadians. We have to understand. We need to get off Facebook and understand, okay, what the heck is going on. We have to start applying intelligence. And Joe, I want to make one comment. Joe is correct. China is brilliant, but we have to match that brilliance with our own brilliance, okay, to get what we want out of this world and get what we want from the universe. We can't blame anybody. We can't make any more excuses. All right? No one's coming to save us. No one. We have to save ourselves. That might not have answered your question, but that's what I felt like I needed to say.
No, that was actually great. So thanks for sharing that. So as we wrap up, I just wanna just get some final thoughts from both of you, but on a particular thing. Because in the book you spoke about success as a mindset, or success is a mindset. So I want to get your final thoughts on that as we wrap up. So I would ask maybe Claude to just talk about the success mindset. That's somebody who has been molding minds for years upon years. And then Perry, just give your final thoughts on that. And as we close, so just give me your final thoughts on the idea of success being a mindset.
So let me say from the very onset that intelligence is the ability to survive. Right? That's the ability to survive. Right? There are no universities in the Amazon forest. For these people, they survive. Right? And so forth. So in terms of success, if one does not apply intelligence, it will be very, very much impossible for that person to be successful. In short run, very, very important, because you have to apply. If you look in Grenada, most of these parish festivals that started have failed. And you know why they failed? Lack of creativity. Because it's the same old, year after year. People got fed up, and the attendance dropped, and as a result of that. So if you're applying intelligence, creative juices will flow, right? Creative juices will flow. I remember in Trinidad, the nuts vendors, people started complaining, boy, we tired, it's just nuts alone all of a sudden. The vendors started putting raisins in the nuts, Another complaint came up again. Boy, I just left home, I just brushed my teeth, and I can't want to eat nuts now. The vendor started putting what? Toothpicks in the nuts bag. I mean, this is applied intelligence. You understand? In order for us to succeed, we must be creative. And in order for us to be creative, we must apply intelligence. And I rest my case.
Very short with this. So I'm going to go into my book. I write it, so I might use it. So in the preface, I'm going to read you a quote. Okay? It goes like this. Never forget that intelligence rules the world. The intelligence rules the world, and ignorance carries the burden. Therefore, remove yourself as far as possible from ignorance and seek far as possible to be intelligent. So let me read one more time. Never forget that intelligence rules the world, and ignorance carries the burden. Therefore, remove yourself as far as possible from ignorance and seek as far as possible to be intelligent. So said Marcus Garvey. Okay? What I'm saying is nothing new. I come with no original thought. No original thought. Marcus Garvey said this. Okay? How many years and decades ago? Right? Claude is right. We're going backwards. So I'm not here to carry no burden of ignorance. Apply intelligence, and those who've applied intelligence rule the world. So you make the choice. Suffer in ignorance or apply intelligence, okay, and create your own prosperity. And I rest my case too.
Fantastic. And I believe that's a great way to wrap up. There is something that I wanna read again from the introduction. There is something that you have here that I thought that was very interesting. I want to read it out as I wrap up. And it says that we must seek truth as the main underlying principle of our existence. And in order to find it, there are a few rules of thumb to keep in mind. And I want to share those rules of thumb. It says, 1, we have to challenge conventional wisdom, the status quo, and seek to know what is true or what is false. It says always look for evidence. Always look for evidence for ideas presented to you. Keep an open mind and consider alternative views. No one has yet cornered the market on good ideas. Consider the consequence and implication of every decision you make. It also says be willing to take risk. And if you do not have any skin in the game, understand that your commitment and sincerity will be questioned. Always question the original question. And if you do not know the original questions, seek them out. Question often have answers embedded in them. And finally, it says maintain a healthy skepticism. There is no original thought. Everything in this vast universe has been put out there or done before at some point in history. So I just wanted to end on that point and say thank you very much to Mr. Perry Douglas and Mr. Claude Douglas for joining me today on Dropping Bars. We were talking about applied intelligence. Mr. Perry Douglas is the author of the new book, Applied Intelligence, a Renaissance in New Thinking for Caribbean Prosperity in the 21st Century. And you can find the book on Amazon. You can get on there, order the book, read it. I mean, based on the discussion that we've been having, I'm pretty sure if I were to like really go deep in the book and just start talking about everything, we can spend the entire day or maybe the entire week just discussing this. So I encourage every one of you to go out there and get the book. Check out Amazon. The author is Mr. Perry Douglas, and again, the name is Applied Intelligence: A Renaissance in New Thinking for Caribbean Prosperity in the 21st Century. So, Perry, Claude, thank you so much for joining me today on Dropping Bars. And to everyone who's watching, thank you again for tuning in to another week, another episode of Dropping Bars. And don't forget to subscribe and share, like, comment wherever you're consuming this podcast on. And I will see you next week for another episode of Dropping Bars. Again, I am your host, Kimron Corion, signing out, and I will see you next week.
Yo, a brightest tower representing Dropping Bars with Kimron Corion. It's all about life lesson in a youth. Bob Marley do it with them mouth, Zidane do it with them foot. Never doubt yourself. Never lose the focus. Just some more positive content, you know. Fully provision. Good meditation. Dropping bars and I build the motivation. Yo, Kimron Corion. Every ghetto youth, them a pre-elevation. Stop carry feelings, focus on the arts and craft. Get rid of all malice and dirty art, youth. Work hard, believe in your dreams. These are the motivation tips, dog. Success strategies. Energy follow energies. Negative follow negativity. There is a free will to creativity. It's a journey within. Cause we dropping bars. Dropping bars, dropping bars. We keep going hard. Going hard, going hard. We keep dropping bars. Dropping bars, dropping bars. Dropping bars, dropping bars. We keep going hard. Going hard, going hard. Dropping bars, dropping bars.